Well, good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled How Sponsors Are Accelerating Clinical Trials with Automatic EHR Integration. My name is Ryan Muse, and I'll be your X-Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and this presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. Now, the webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit your questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you require any assistance along the way, you can contact me at any time by sending a message using this same chat panel. At this time, know that all participants are in listen-only mode, and please note that the event will be recorded and made available for streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank OpenClinica, who developed the content for this presentation. OpenClinica accelerates clinical trials by automating source data capture through its software-as-a-service platform. They provide a secure bridge between healthcare and research that enables rapid data acquisition and are trusted by leading life science companies, academic institutions, contract research organizations, and government entities. To date, OpenClinica has supported over 10,000 studies worldwide involving over 5 million patients. As innovators in clinical trial technology, they work to advance the state of research for the betterment of global healthcare. Now, before we move on to the main portion of the presentation, we have a poll question for audience members to interact with. This should be appearing on everyone's screen right now, and you can vote by clicking on any of the answers you see in front of you and then clicking submit. Your question is, are you using automated integration of EHR data in your research today? Your answer options are yes, regularly, yes, starting to, not yet but planning to, or just not yet. We'll give everyone some time to consider their answers, and we appreciate you coming today for this presentation, and we'll hear from our speakers shortly. It looks like most of you have submitted an answer, so thank you very much for participating. Let's look at your results here. We have 48% of you saying that not yet, 21% for not yet but planning to, 17% for yes regularly, and then 14% for yes starting to. So again, thank you for your participation. Without further ado, though, I'd like to hand the mic over to our first speaker for today, Cal Collins, CEO of OpenClinica. You may begin when you're ready.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining today. Interesting to see those poll responses. I think that reflects, where we see things are in this field as early on in adoption, but really happening, and it's great to see participants at all stages of that evaluation and adoption curve joining us today. So today we're going to discuss integrating EHRs, electronic health record systems, with electronic data capture systems to automate data collection in clinical research. We'll look at the benefits that can be achieved, challenges in doing so, and how to do so successfully, and just consider the overall state of the field. As Ryan said, we want to really focus on discussion and Q&A. We encourage you to submit your questions. We'll answer as many of those as we can as we go and towards the end of the webinar today. And if we don't get to all of them, we'll make sure to follow up after. It's really exciting to have an amazing group of panelists here who offer very different perspectives on EHR EDC integration, experience, and future plans. As we go, I'll introduce quickly each panelist in turn. Today we're going to start with Dr. Adam Acer, who's the Chief Data Officer of Quantum Leap Healthcare, and also jointly the Director of Information Technology at the UCSF Breast Care Clinic. Among many other responsibilities, Adam leads the OneSource platform collaboration with the FDA, and we're going to hear some about some of the amazing work that has been done from Adam. And with that lead in, I will turn things over to Adam.
Thanks, Cal. So when the pandemic hit in 2020, as Cal mentioned, we'd already been working with the FDA and OpenClinica in finding ways of improving efficiencies and cost savings and data quality for running clinical trials. And when the pandemic hit, we knew immediately that many of the sites would be under-resourced, and we needed to find a way to rapidly bring up a platform trial similar to the I-SPY 2 platform for breast cancer, where we would be able to integrate with these EHR platforms relatively quickly with minimal overhead and cost, and also be able to do it in a way that was seamless, where these sites would have minimal resources to actually engage in clinical trials. Another aspect of our approach was to also not just reach out to academic centers, but also to community hospitals and areas that normally don't participate in clinical trials, to make sure that we would have broader coverage and access for the use of this trial. Next slide. So we moved fairly quickly. Within 6 weeks, we were able to bring this trial online with 14 sites. We now have over 30 sites with over 3,000 participants in the trial. Half of these subjects are observational patients. So what's as serving as real world data, what's important here is typically folks consider observational cohorts as part of chart review. What we were able to do with our EHR integration is also pull their data for subjects that were not directly a participant in the trial and get their data in real time for those with the EHR integration. Next slide. And in terms of the outcomes of the trial, this is for our initial 2 sites, which are UCSF and Memorial Care at Long Beach. We immediately saw a 15-fold improvement. So just in getting the administrative discrete data, such as laboratory data and ConMeds, we went from taking about an hour for 5 subjects to 4 to 5 minutes, which was a dramatic increase or decrease in time and a dramatic improvement. In addition to that, we also saw across all our sites, and now we have implementations at 15 of our sites, over half of our sites right now, where they're implemented both at Epic sites and also at Cerner sites. We're seeing a 40 to 60% improvement in time reduction of getting the primary endpoint data into our trial. Earlier this year in the spring, we were recognized by BioIT World, where we jointly submitted with Open Clinica. We were very honored to be recognized for bringing about these efficiencies in improving clinical trial data capture. And I think it's a great opportunity to expand this approach to other therapeutic areas. We're now moving this into other areas, and our next speaker will be talking more about this in the area of breast cancer. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mike Hogarth. Sorry, Cal. I'm a clinical research information officer from UC San Diego, and we're thrilled to actually participate in this transition towards tight integration of data capture with our clinical infrastructure. And we've actually gone so far as not just participating in I-SPY, but we've also made this part of our strategy going forward as we move a lot of our clinical research infrastructure in a more tightly integrated fashion into our electronic healthcare record infrastructure. So we look forward to actually having the benefits that Adam has talked about. But and so far, we found the implementation to be actually quite low cost and very efficient, because due to the Cures Act and its requirement to have certified electronic healthcare record system users like ourselves having this interface open and running, we did not encounter any real difficulties or challenges in working with our EHR folks to integrate the systems. In fact, the APIs were already up and running, and it was a very simple task to integrate the 2 systems. I think it took us maybe a month, and in total hours, less than 50 hours of total time. That includes testing, which is dramatically better than in the past when we used older integrations. Took us usually months and hundreds of hours of staff time. So this is a very plug and play kind of situation, and it was very easy to implement. So we're just underway with the I-SPY breast cancer trial, and like I said before, we have added this to our portfolio. So we actually use the Open Clinica system now to enable electronic case report form data entry into the CTMS from within our EHR and look forward to those efficiencies and improvements. One of the interesting things, as I mentioned before, something that you might not have considered is why is this happening today? And one of the key issues here is the EHR adoption. I think 10 years ago, electronic healthcare record adoption was around 30%, and then we had the HITECH Act. Today, the adoption is around 98%, and then with the addition of this integration that's required as part of the Cures Act, this fast healthcare interoperability resources, or FHIR, now we have this completely different playing field in terms of being able to connect to that infrastructure, as Adam pointed out. So the Cures Act codifies the requirement that all HPOs must have this FHIR interface on and running. And FHIR itself has evolved to the point where it's actually easy and straightforward to get a lot of the structured data that in the past had to be entered by hand by clinical research coordinators. So that's the big change, and why now as opposed to 5 years ago, and things that you all should be thinking about. We do about 40% sponsored trials, so we're looking forward to actually invoking this and then passing the data off to CROs or sponsors in a more automated fashion, thus improving even the latency and improving the data quality as we pass it on to the sponsors. Next.
Great. Thank you, Mike. I think it's great to hear that perspective, and same from Adam. I'm gonna next turn things over to Mike Keens. Mike has 20 years experience in clinical trial development, management, and commercial efforts across both large global contract research organizations, life sciences organizations, and in smaller companies as well. He's worked across therapeutic areas, and I think it'd be great to hear Mike's perspective. So, Mike, take it away.
Great, thanks, Cal, and happy to be involved in this presentation and with the speakers here today. When we think about the chart review process and the beginning poll, you spoke to this a little bit as well. When we think about this, there are really two, while there are multiple EHR system providers out there, there are two dominant players, and those are Epic and Cerner. And those two organizations comprise about 60% of the EHR use, at least in the United States. So when we think about the tools and the capabilities that are there are multiple EHR systems, and I'm sure our audience has a lot of exposure to that. But I would say pretty safely that most audience members listening to this today or in the future are exposed either to Epic or to Cerner as their health system and health record. Whether you are a large academic medical institute like UCSF or UCSD, whether you are a large health system, or whether you're an actual research practice aligned with or integrated into a larger hospital system, chances are you're using one of those two systems. And so when we think about how you can utilize tools like EHR to EDC tool for your clinical research, there are a number of areas, and we're fortunate enough to have the data that were presented earlier by Dr. Asair and Dr. Hogarth on everything from COVID and infectious disease indications to breast cancer and oncology indications. And so when you're thinking about how to deploy or to use or integrate a system like this, it really, the basis is anything that you're looking to capture an existing data within the medical record in an efficient way is a great candidate for tools like this to reduce burden, but also to enhance the cleanliness of the data that's being collected for the clinical trial. And so that really does go across a large number of therapeutic areas that can be considered. I would say in addition, not only across multiple therapeutic areas, but when patients who are participating in these trials come in with large medical histories, so where you're taking robust data, either at a large level, like Dr. Asair mentioned earlier with a chart abstraction or a chart review, natural history, or where you're having patients who are coming into the clinical trial with a pretty robust medical record, medical history that needs to be applied into the clinical trial record, these are great tools. And so everything from standard chart abstractions to therapeutic areas like rare disease, oncology, immunology, CNS, all make great areas to consider for tools and approaches like this. when we look at not only the benefits to the trial, but also to the relationships that are taking place in clinical research, whether that's with the CRO and the sponsor or with the site and the sponsor, I think a couple of things that we want to consider. The first is using tools like this, which are obviously well validated, as have been discussed in the real world examples leading into my section. These are validated tools that provide clean data. So not only is the data itself that you're receiving for the clinical trial very clean, because it is coming as a direct entry into the original case record, no duplicate data entry and exposure to manual error potentially. But it really at the site level allows sites and site staff to focus their time and attention on more value added activities, whether that's the expansion of patient recruitment or staying in touch with patients for enhanced retention, whether it's being able and being available to facilitate data review by sponsor and CRO CRAs and other staff members, or quite honestly, and I believe that there are a number of sites attending this call today, whether you can take 2 breaths instead of 1 between all the activities that you're doing on a daily basis, and reducing the burden of what you're doing on as part of the clinical trial activity. So I think those are really important areas to enhance the overall relationship that's taking place in the clinical trial environment, whether that be as a pharmaceutical sponsor, as a CRO, or as a site themselves directly. So how do we go about doing that and integrating this approach into what we do in clinical research? I think the first is understanding that these are well-validated systems and we have real-world examples of their application. It's conducting webinars like this and increasing awareness, increasing the understanding, and about 50% of individuals are not currently using EHR data into the clinical trial record. Understanding that that's a possibility, I think, is step number 1 and approach number 1. The second is, if you're a CRO working with a sponsor, thinking about how to implement tools like this proactively in the clinical trial origination steps is hugely important, not only for the downstream impact for site staff that are working on this, but as Dr. Acer said earlier with his numbers from the real world, reducing the effort involved and enhancing your timelines. So that's, I think, another approach. And finally, if you're a site listening to this or thinking about these tools, being able to proactively distinguish yourself in the site selection process probably not only helps you with the time and attention of your staff, but may also allow you to participate in additional studies because of your efficiency. So a lot of great areas that we're seeing in the real world application of this technology, not only to help clinical trials and their timelines and drug development, but in those individuals that are involved with those trials to begin with. So a lot of exciting information and perspective that we're seeing from the use of these tools. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Ryan, who has our next poll question.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. So appearing on everyone's screen right now is our next poll question. The question we're asking this time is, what do you see as a barrier to using this technology more widely? Your answer options are site adoption, regulatory barriers, implementation of time and cost, something else, or you just don't see any barriers. As with the previous poll, take a moment to select one of the answers in front of you and then click submit in order to participate. The question again is, what do you see as a barrier to use this technology more widely? Give everyone a few more seconds to consider their answer as it best applies to yourself and your organization. It looks like we have most of the answers in now, so let's go ahead and look at our results. We have here 36% for implementation time and cost, 33% for site adoption, 16% for something else, 11% coming in for regulatory barriers, and then 4% of you selecting that you don't see any barriers. So very fascinating. Thank you very much. And Cal, I'll pass this back to you.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Ryan. And we've got a lot of great questions coming in. We purposely didn't put together a ton of slides for the webinar today because we thought we would have that. So we're going to go through a few more slides and overviews, me and Lindsay, and then we'll start the discussion and Q&A. So if you've submitted a question, trust that we will get to it and keep them coming. So, following a lot of what the prior speakers have said, I wanted to talk a little bit about data quality and compliance, because all of this only works if it helps to improve the quality and the completeness and the provenance of your data. Those are the utmost important things in clinical trials, and they come first. So, a few points around, the ecosystem here and what's possible. One is that the EHR data quality, its accessibility, and its completeness is very high. It's radically better than it was just a few years ago, and Dr. Hogarth talked about some of the reasons for that and the drivers of that. We're seeing that on the ground in our implementations and our work. In addition, the FDA has provided eSource and EHR guidance that provide clarity on how that data should be used, how it should be tracked and audited and reported on. I mentioned the provenance of the data, where it came from, how it's good. Working with technology implementations that are validated and can prove they're doing the right thing every time is crucial, as it is with using any eClinical technology. And then, of course, making sure we have a way to do these things that satisfies the privacy and security requirements of both, the research and life sciences side of things, as well as of course the healthcare needs, and those aren't easy things to do, but again, there are standards and frameworks today and approaches we can take to address those in a very sound and increasingly widely accepted way that helps to make scaling implementations very practical and efficient. And then we want to be able to do things consistently within a study, across sites, of course, and across studies. The more every study is a little different, but a lot of studies do a lot of the same things, right? So making things that are reusable, that are highly flexible for study designs across different disease areas. So things like having core EHR data mappings that are out of the box and reusable, with some mapping and translation of some of the structures and standards on the healthcare side of things over to what we typically use and are accustomed to in clinical research, and ultimately are required to have for data submissions. And do that for some core things, and also set things up in an extensible way so that they can be customized and extended to the needs of different study designs and types of trials. The method of integration really matters. The ability to get unique global identifiers for each piece of data that comes from an EHR is a reality today. So we can create audit logs that create a high degree of traceability, certainly far better than anything we could do with manual data entry back to the source of the data. Some data in most studies is still going to need to be captured in more traditional ways or through other routes, whether that's your kind of traditional ECRF entry, direct data capture at the source, ePro data from patients. So the ability to kind of combine those without creating new silos in an integrated solution is really key to just an efficient system, but also contributes in a positive way to data quality and efficiency. We've already touched on ease, cost, and speed of integration and how crucial that is. Study startup is in any study is a time-consuming thing. It takes a lot of investment, and folding integrations into existing procedures of onboarding sites, and then for sites that already have an integration in place, being able to reuse those across studies are really key to success and scale. Talked a little bit about privacy and data protection, and I think we'll get into that a little more later. And if you want to go to the next slide, putting all that in place as the foundation, then leads to the notion of not just can we get this data, but can we create a better user experience for sites, for personnel at sites that work so hard and do so much in clinical research. Make it, lower those barriers to participating in trials for sites, and potentially reach sites that maybe aren't the traditional ones that do a lot of clinical trials. So, I've never heard anyone say I love transcribing data. So I think in terms of creating a better user experience, reducing the amount of data transcription from one place to the other, that kind of swivel chair data entry activity is a good start, and gives research coordinators, clinician investigators, more time to focus on their patients and help trials run well. According to Applied Clinical Trials, 70% of research data is duplicated between the EHR and the EDC. That's a lot, and manual data entry is time-consuming, it's laborious, and it also leads to mistakes. We're all human. We all make mistakes when we're doing things manually. We've been doing this so long in the industry, sometimes we don't think about that, but just because it's the way things have usually been done doesn't make it good. And what we're seeing open up is almost no-brainer opportunities to streamline, automate, improve the quality and completeness and comprehensiveness of data, and hopefully make the individuals that are involved in carrying out the research happier in doing so. So one of the ways we've done that is created a workflow where you can launch into the ECRF and the participant research record directly from the patient chart in the EHR, and then from there either automatically populate the record with data from the chart, as well as do any other manual entry, and also look at the data and perhaps use it in different ways for care and safety purposes at the point of care or in the clinic. So we've heard from about some of the results on the ground, and our next speaker is going to talk for a minute about implementation. So as has been raised a few times, and I'm seeing some of the questions coming in, this is a big deal. And we saw that in the poll result. A few years ago, you might not even consider this type of integration, especially scaled across many sites and studies and more than a pilot type of effort, because the ecosystem just wasn't quite there. But the story is very different today. It's totally different. And our next panelist, Lindsay Bentley, is about as good a person as there could be to cover this topic. Lindsay is an experienced project manager in healthcare and research who's worked at Epic Systems and leads Open Clinica's EHR to EDC integration implementations. Lindsay's been instrumental in the OneSource implementations that we heard Adam speak about earlier, and I will hand things over to Lindsay.
Thanks, Cal. As Cal mentioned, my background was in EHR implementations at Epic. So used to, back in 2018 even, you'd have a project of this scale and people would expect months to a year for something like this to get done. And sometimes it's hard to believe that now we've been able to get that down to weeks to days. But referencing all the industry trends that have been touched upon up to this point, it is a reality, and it's been really exciting to continue to iterate on that process as well. So the slide you're seeing here is just one of the many reviews we've gotten back with some of the folks we've worked with. This is a project director at one of our sites, and they're really excited to have their staff be able to use this and save some time doing that direct data entry. You can advance the slide for me, Ryan. Thanks. So how can we get this done? Touching on some of those industry trends, we're in a space where most of the major EHRs are more interoperable than ever. With those trends in the last 10 years have really advanced that technology. We focus a lot on Epic and Cerner as the two major EHR systems, especially in the US with FHIR. I don't know if we have folks on the line from international sites, but as Epic and Cerner are expanding their footprint internationally, those FHIR standards that we've referenced are international standards based too. So although some of the US regulations have made that a requirement here, the US may be a bit further along, but can leverage those same data standards internationally, which is exciting as we look to expand. And the push for decentralized trials, I think with the onset of COVID-19 and lots of other trends in that direction, trying to do more with less. There's more data that's needed with less overhead and less individual site participation. The new standard of eSource data is allowing for those decentralized trials to thrive with being able to capture data like this in a single click. So through all of these ways, we've been able to put together an implementation plan that is very streamlined and pretty rinse and repeat across those major EHR systems. Each time we learn something a little bit new, but have been able to put together some pretty good best practices as we continue to expand and implement at more sites. You can move forward to the next slide. And so some of those challenges we touched on earlier and called out in the poll that we just saw. A lot of sites are worried about sites adopting this, and the reason that sites may not want to adopt it is, oh, this is going to cost me a lot of time and resources. We've seen how lightweight this can be based on using those FHIR standards, and we don't need to staff a large team to get this done. Most of the mapping is already in place for all of the major data elements that we're capturing. So this makes it pretty simple to install. Technical readiness is definitely something to highlight from a sponsor perspective as you're working with sites. Want to see if they're ready to take on an install like this. So sure, there can be some variations between EHR sites. Everyone's network infrastructure might be a little bit different, but we've gotten good at asking those questions up front as you're looking to move forward, trying to get an idea of, we may have some slight variances between sites of maybe someone's hosted locally or not hosted locally, or have some other different types of integrations or third parties they work with at their site. But overall, especially with the Epic App Market and the Cerner Code program, we've been able to front load most of that validation and work. So setting up connectivity between our two systems can be relatively simple. But those are always some good things to get ahead of as you're talking to a potential site. From the site side, we've seen sites have been really excited, as I mentioned, about the lightweight implementation, but also for their ability to use a hybrid or phased approach. For a study like iSpy COVID, for example, you can have dozens of sites that are live on the study. You may not expect that every single site on the study is going to go live on this integration within a year or less, and that's okay. We're still seeing really large benefits from a hybrid approach, even if 10% of your sites are using this integration. That's still going to improve the bottom line of overall time and cost that it's taking to get data at those sites. And also because of the way that we've implemented this with our source data originators, our audit trail is tracing everything. There's no concern about sites having various inputs of data. We can standardize where that data is coming from and the source data verification that needs to be done at those different sites. Once it's in place, this can be reused across multiple sponsors and trials. So once that initial setup is done and the application is in place, building it out per protocols that may arise is a lot more lightweight. It's not as though you have to do a full-scale implementation each time. You can reuse those common data elements like labs, medications, demographics, things like that that are going to be realistically imported on many different study protocols. I think that covers most of what I have there. So thank you so much. Now that brings us to about 25 minutes left for questions. So thank you all for your attention. And Cal, I can pass it off to you if you're ready to divvy up the questions. I think question one might be going to me, so I'm also happy to jump right in.
Yeah, awesome. I just want to say thank you to the panelists today and to all the attendees for submitting what will look to be some great questions. So as you said, Lindsay, let's jump right in. I think Ryan's going to read the questions and then we'll discuss.
Yes, excellent. Thank you very much. I would also like to take a moment to remind the audience how they can keep sending their questions or comments using the questions window for the Q&A portion of our webinar. We have already received some wonderful questions. Our very first one, and yes, Lindsay, it would be, I think, directed towards yourself. It first states fantastic results on the lab capture. What they're curious to know is how you standardized things like units of measure and lab-specific ranges across so many institutions.
Thanks for that. Yeah, great question. What we have done is we are pulling in the data for the studies that are live today as it is recorded in the chart. So whatever that source lab system has as their unit, their reference range, that's what we're capturing. We're trying to maintain the EHR as source of truth as much as possible and are bringing in data exactly as it appears. From there, if there are certain alerts and queries and things that need to be built out if a lab is out of range, to alert a physician to review it, things like that. We have all of that capability within our standard EDC, and can be used. But in general, we're trying to stick to source data as much as possible. So that's how we're capturing that.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Our next question would like to know simply, why does it still take a month to integrate? Given FHIR, you would think it could be automatic. I think Dr. Asari or Dr. Hogarth, you may be able to share some of your insights on this.
Yeah, I'll take the first part. So we now have 17 implementations, and I know on the Epic front, on average, the actual hours spent, it's all configuration. We have estimated about 12 to 14 actual hands-on configuration hours. The rest of the time typically is more administrative, getting the meetings, getting the paperwork in place. I usually don't put that in the same bucket. So I would say that this is a really small lift compared to prior approaches that I've heard about, in terms of it just basically working with the team in terms of where to place the launch button. But for most of it, this is pretty much a out-of-the-box turnkey solution per trial. So we've been able to move very quickly across all our sites. So those are my thoughts based on our experience with 15 of our implementations with Open Clinic.
As one of the sites, one thing I'll mention is I was a big skeptic myself, because I've been through many of these integrations before, and so I was a big skeptic. So we actually timed the session in terms of when we got on the Zoom with our technical person from the EHR, the right technical person, and the technical person on the other end, and using FHIR. We'd already enabled the FHIR, the FHIR interfaces on, and we actually timed how long it took for the test systems to be connected and data to be shared, and it took 29 minutes. So I'll repeat, less than half an hour. So that's about as short as you can get. And that included the security connections, okay? And so that was very little. As Adam pointed out, the rest is governance. And I will say one last thing as a site is, who should have the button enabled and appearing on the Epic screen and who should not is really study specific, and or up to how you're going to do this. And there are a variety of things you would do. In this case, we are now moving all of our protocols into our EHR using Epic Research, and that's where we start the protocol. So they're authored there. So now we know exactly who's in what trial. And because of that, we can then have a smart way of showing the right button, because even though we're connecting to iSpy, we have other sponsors who also want us to connect, and it's not going to be the same patients. So we have to be able to have the button show up, and not show up. So a lot of that is that kind of configuration that Adam's talking about. But the actual connecting for us, as a skeptic, it took 29 minutes. I couldn't believe it. And so I tell people it's pretty much automatic. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much for that answer. I have another question here for you, Dr. Hogarth. It first starts by saying a lot of rich content for oncology patients lives in clinical notes. The question is there an approach moving forward to extract any of this content for this framework?
Yeah, it's a great question, because that's really one of the toughest areas. I mean, it's one thing to take the structured data that already exists in the EHR, things like lab data, medications, things like that are structured already, and then pulling them in. But I think what you're alluding to are those key data elements that typically are in narrative text today are not captured in a structured fashion. So there's really a lot of people talk about NLP and things like that. I've not seen NLP work very well. But this is, I think, one of the reasons this one source project came about, really, and why it's called one source, where you capture it in one structured data, sort of case report form or form, and now you've got it structured. And these are key decision point pieces of data. So I think you have one of two ways to go. One is to do it that way and essentially expose the clinician or the staff to that, while trying to not impede their very time-sensitive care delivery that happens. And I'll just give you an example. Our ophthalmologists attendings spend 3.5 minutes per patient in our clinic, because the techs and everybody have done all this other stuff. So they're there with the patient for 3.5 minutes. You insert now a form that they have to fill out. It has to be very simple, launched very quickly. And so all those things kind of happen with the system we've implemented with Open Clinica, because one of its big strengths is actually the simplicity and navigation of the forms that we can create, and the self-serve kind of nature of the forms. In Epic, to do the exact same form in Epic, and we did this before, we evaluated that versus doing it in Epic using smart forms. The smart form took about a week to do. The smart form, or the same kind of form in Open Clinica, and I think a lot of other EDCs, but Open Clinica in particular took about 45 minutes to do this, to actually author the form. And that's already connected to the database to store it. The form in the EHR with smart forms then required going to the EHR team to figure out where that's going to be placed in the backend database. So it was only half done in 4 days. So just to give you an idea, and then just the ease of use of the form, the web front end is much easier. So for those reasons, we advocate for doing data capture in that way, particularly for rare disease registries as well, which I think was one of the questions there.
That's excellent. Those are great reasons. Thank you very much for that in-depth answer. I have another question here for Dr. Asari. It would first state that in my experience, the data from EHR often has mistakes and needs to be updated. The question is, how do you account for getting this updated data from EHR?
That's a great question. So if there are updates to the EHR and the sites are aware of it, the way we've implemented in our partnership with Open Clinica, the EHR integration is we can directly repull that data, and it will refresh the data within that patient record to get the updated record. So we focused on concomitant medication and lab data, and that gives us an opportunity to get any data that may have been updated during the period of that patient's enrollment on the trial. I also want to add that a big part of our study is, while we want contemporaneous data collection in real time, that was a big part of our study, we're also able to go back retrospectively. And this is a big part, even though our census numbers are down for COVID, we're able to go retrospectively, specifically for our real world data observational cohort, all the way back to the start of those patients' enrollment, where there are checks to make sure we only collect at the start of that patient's enrollment all the way through the entire period, which may be up to 60 to 90 days. We had patients that were critically ill. You can imagine we already have estimated hundreds and hundreds of hours saved in data entry. And on top of that, minimizing the level of source data verification that I forgot to mention earlier, that from a sponsor is a huge overhead and very time consuming to address. So I hope I answered that question.
That was great. Thank you very much for that. Now, next, Cal, I have a question here for you that would just simply like to know, what is the EHR status and FHIR adoption status in Europe?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, FHIR is a standard that's promulgated by HL7, which is a global standards body for healthcare data. And there's a tremendous amount of momentum and initiatives globally behind FHIR. It's really become the lingua franca of healthcare data in recent years. I would say the US is in many ways leading in terms of my knowledge of implementation on the ground, and the consistency and comprehensiveness of that across the market of healthcare providers. A lot of that is due to some of the regulatory mandates that we have here in the U.S. that everyone support that. But certainly see a tremendous amount of momentum towards it, and implementations on the ground in the UK, in the EU, and in my opinion, that will continue to accelerate. And then kind of going from kind of FHIR for healthcare as a whole to research. There are organizations like Vulcan, which is an HL7 accelerator that's really helping to push the evolution of the standards and adoption of those standards to make sure they're better and better fit for some of the use cases that we focus on in research. And again, that's a very global effort.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Now I've got another question here for you. It first states that currently not all EHR vendors are in fire, and also data acquisition may not always be easy for getting complete source docs. Perhaps easier for a limited number of patients enrolled in a specific trial, but what do you see as the scalability challenges?
Yeah, another great question. I think what we've seen in our experience is that again, in the U.S., healthcare providers that have an EHR, they have to be able to support the FHIR standards and be able to share data in a conformance with that specification. But there are places are at different points along the readiness curve and adoption curve. One thing we've done, and Adam or Lindsay, feel free to jump in here, but in the I-SPY COVID trial, it's very much a hybrid approach where especially at the beginning, the trial was underway, and as enrollment had already started, we were onboarding the integrations with our first set of sites, and as we did more and more sites, the pace started to accelerate and pick up speed. But at the same time, some sites were doing things in the traditional way, and others were using the integration, and so that hybrid approach to things is something that you can do, and certainly helps with scalability, and if you're doing large global trials where there's readiness in different areas, certainly. Lindsay or Adam or anyone else, if you have anything else to add to that, go right ahead.
Cal, I'll just add one thing. I think I know Adam looks at it, from the sponsor angle in a way. As a site, we have hundreds of trials, right? And I think one of the things that I'm amazed by, because I'm an observer now of I-SPY, yes, we participate, but I'm an observer. And like I said before, I was a skeptic. I was converted when we saw what happened in about a half an hour. But still, then there's how do you do this across multiple sites? And not every site is going to want to do this, and as you pointed out. But the fact that I think Adam mentioned 15 or more sites, 17 sites now have done this in less than a year, I think, is pretty much proof of the pudding that this is not that difficult from a governance standpoint or an integration standpoint, and it can actually be done. So this wasn't like I-SPY was paying people millions of dollars to do this. It basically asked them, do you want to do it the old way or do it the new way? And we jumped at the new way because of all the benefits that you're pointing out, not because we're paying, we're being paid any differently or anything like that. There was no change in any of that. It was basically, we wanted to reduce our time of our staff having to enter this data because we ourselves are needing to be cost constrained now. It's hard to get a well-trained clinical research coordinator. And just like many healthcare providers in the age of COVID, that is a thankless job today to be doing this. It's very difficult, much more difficult than just 2 or 3 years ago. And so by reducing that data acquisition burden on them, it allows them to focus on the patients and what they really love to do and not sit there and dealing with typing, abstracting stuff. So I just wanted to highlight that the proof is there. I mean, 17 sites without really changing a whole lot fiscally is pretty dramatic and kind of proved, I think, the point that it works.
Thanks, Dr. Hogarth. And I would also mention that as more sites have come live, I can use the Epic sites as an example, since that's the majority at the moment, just with their coverage. Epic community members love to talk to each other about what workflows they're doing, what they've built out. So if one site has built out a cool integration like Dr. Hogarth described for I-SPY, being able to dynamically show the launch button for certain types of users and certain types of patients, other community members have come together and reached out, and their analysts can consult and say, here's how we built this. So it doesn't have to go through the vendor. It doesn't have to go through us at Open Clinica for the folks to have those discussions about how to set it up at their EHR, and they can see it working at another site. So fostering those conversations between the Epic Community Library and others who are live on the Smart app, I think has helped to further the best practices, as the Epic analysts know best on how to build this out, and I've seen it work and can speak with each other. So that's been cool to see.
Some great insight. Thank you both very much for that answer. I've got a question here that Dr. Hogarth, you may have some insight in, but also I think, Mike, you may want to provide some thoughts. The question is, what about rare disease data where, because of the volume of patients and leading edge research, data elements are not captured directly by EHR?
How about Mike K first, because I've dominated the conversation, I think. But I'll speak to it after him about registries, which are not sponsored, but I think is an important element of rare disease.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Dr. Hogarth. I'll leave you some room. Yeah, no, it's a great question. I guess I look at it in a couple of different ways. I mean, the first is if you continue with the current, there's no doubt that rare disease patients particularly have, are in a set of patients that have a robust amount of data, usually, across different areas that may be being collected, whether that's standard visits, genetic testing, things like that. I think the first part is, if you're just doing what's normally taking place, then you're entering all the data in by hand. And so, you're not doing anything different without using any tools. But the second piece is, if it's not being captured in an EHR, I think that's still okay. There are other connections and other relationships that have been built, particular to Open Clinica with Apple Health and other areas where patient-reported data can be uploaded into some of the systems. And so, in general, and not to overcharacterize an entire patient population, but in general, rare disease patients and families and care partners tend to have a good handle on the data that's being collected because it's so important to them, and the treatment of their loved one. And so, being able to provide uploads directly of their information is possible as well, even if for information not collected in the EHR. But I guess in general, I would say, it's the difference between being pulled into a marathon and being able to drive 25 of the 26 miles and run the last one, or do you want to run all 26? And so, not to disparage any runners out there, but I'd be in the car and just take the last 1 mile of manual upload or other areas. But happy to have Dr. Hogarth provide commentary to it as well from the registry or site perspective.
Yeah, thanks. One thing I will mention, there are a couple points on rare disease research. One is the multi-site nature of it. Really, I think this is a big advantage to doing the multi-site, and I think iSpy kind of shows how that can be done. The other is just institutionally, we have a lot of world experts here at UCSD, and they're very interested in doing this kind of data capture at the point of care. And doing that with the EHR has always been difficult because you have to create the forms. As I mentioned before, the form creation and management is a heavy burden. And it really is designed for things that are going to be basically, part of the EHR for a long time. Some of these need to be authored, changed, et cetera, versioned. That's the other important thing about this is versioning, which doesn't really exist in the EHR. This idea of, what form did you enter, that was presented to the end user and the versioning of it. But when it comes to rare diseases and registries, we really see this ability to launch a web-based secure web form, within the EHR as key to being able to do data capture at the point of care in those clinics by the staff. And then it allows us to identify, not only have, identify the patient as having one with rare disorder, but also having that additional very deep data about those individuals. And we're using that all the time now, including for quality improvement. So, this is where the learning healthcare system meets clinical research, quote unquote, this sort of area of pragmatic trial and, clinical research and data capture. And a lot of it is either passive data capture or prospective active data capture. And this really simplifies that. So it may not actually be a regulated clinical trial, but a significant portion of our research portfolio is doing this, as well as advantageous for us moving forward as a learning healthcare system, particularly around these patients. So academic health systems, I think, are particularly interested in this, like we are, because it drives both missions there. This, improving quality with very challenging patients that are rare disorders, et cetera, as well as creating registries where, let's say, a sponsor might be interested in doing research. We can identify this is what we have, and by the way, we already have this data. I think Adam mentioned this retrospective data capture. As long as it's consented, it's there and can be leveraged by the sponsor or whoever is sponsoring the trial.
Wonderful. This has been great so far. We've got another question here, kind of directed to the entire group, really, just stating that at times EHR data isn't current or updated by non-research providers, diagnosis data, ConMeds, etc. The question is, do you have details on when inaccurate EHR data is imported? Does this cause additional burden on sites or CRAs?
Boy, I can answer that one. Again, sorry, but I'll answer that one, and I'll answer with probably not a great answer for you, in the sense that this is the art of doing this. Is the data in the EHR? It depends what you're looking for. For example, if you want diagnosis, did you mean admitting diagnosis? Did you mean the diagnosis that drove somebody to do a test on hospital day 2, or which may not be the diagnosis? Or are you interested in the summary after the discharge, which says, okay, this person came in with chest pain, we thought it was a PE, but it actually was an MI. Okay, then it's diagnosis MI. Those are, just so you know, Epic has 9 diagnoses, contexts for the diagnosis. So it's really important, and of course, Lindsay knows this better than all of us, that's really important to kind of understand that when you're doing this. This is the art of doing this. So this technology, FHIR is not going to solve that, but this is what you focus on, and so you're actually gathering the right data elements for what you're seeking to do. And then the mapping is so important, as Cal pointed out, mapping this to what to your data elements that you need to report on. So yes, there's a disconnect between EHR land and data elements, which are contextualized around care provisioning, and the research, which is important for data collection on the research side. And those two have to come together, and that's where the art is, and working with sites and the sponsor working with sites around this.
And I'd just jump in on that and say, it's where you look at the different data that a given protocol needs, and the context of what type of patients you're dealing with, and other factors, and then use the tools that we've always used, but in many cases you don't need those more traditional tools, or in a lot of cases you need less of them, and those are things like certainly having a good data management and monitoring plan in place, doing the appropriate level of SDV, facilitating the record abstraction by getting the structured data that you can get and putting the source records right in front of the user in easier ways. So the integration can be an enabler of all those things. And in some cases, we know we're getting high quality, very well structured and very comprehensive data, and that's the best case. But even in these more complex cases that Mike cited, there are still ways to facilitate and make things better over what today's standards are, by combining the integration capabilities with proven approaches.
All right, well, thank you very much for that answer, all of you, for all of your answers today. However, we have reached the end of the Q&A portion of this webinar. Now, if we couldn't attend to your questions, the team at Open Clinica will follow up with you, or if you have further questions, you can direct them to the email address that's up on the screen. I want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from XTalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen as you exit, and your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve our webinars. Now, I'm also sending you a link in the chat box, and with this link, you'll be able to view the recording of this event on this page, and you can also share this link with your colleagues when they register for the recording here as well. So I encourage you to do that. Now, please join me once more in thanking our speakers for their wonderful time here today. We hope that you all found the webinar informative. Have a great day, everyone, and thank you for coming.
Thanks all.
Thank you.